Oh, what? I'm doing an Edgar Wright video for the 1000th time and you didn't think I was going to dress as Shaun? Come on. Get out of town, you morons. Hello everyone, Dan here. I am definitely not about to re-record the intro because I accidentally deleted the footage. It's definitely not what's going on here. It's definitely why you can't see the sun creeping in all of a sudden. It's definitely not what's going on here. Bloody hell. What definitely is happening is that I'm doing my revised ranking of every film directed by Mr. Edgar Wright.
Okay, John, it's time for the
You're probably all watching this thinking, Dan, this is great and all, but didn't you already do this video? And yes, I did. I did this video about 2.5 years ago now, and it was around when Last Night in Soho had just come out, so it was kind of topical to do, but looking back, that video just isn't very good for a multitude of reasons. First one being, I didn't even include all of his films. I didn't include his debut comedy western spoof Fistful of Fingers. I didn't include that. I don't really know why. I just thought it wasn't a proper film, but everywhere from Letterboxd to Wikipedia considers it part of his filmography, along with the other 6 narrative features that he's done. So I'm going to include it here, so just to give it the kind of, make it feel more rounded. And also just like the presentation of that video just wasn't very good. It's not really up to my modern standards, and also because that video just didn't do very well, because it was at the time, you know, early 2022, I was mainly doing Doctor Who content, so some film videos like these kind of ones, that they just went under the radar. Nobody really gave them a chance. But I felt with all the film content that I do now and the director rankings and such, I felt Edgar Wright deserves the 5-star treatment because, you know, costume, budget and all, because he is one of my favourite directors. And rewatching his films, I fell in love with his movies again. Now, Edgar Wright was one of the early directors that I really remember getting into in terms of getting into their films, because especially with the Cornetto trilogy, you know, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End, you know, there they are there. But those films are so ingrained in British culture, you know, they're so quoted, they've been so quoted for the past, you know, 20 odd years or whatever, that I kind of really connect with his style, and then, you know, that extends to the majority of his other films that he's done. And of course, back then I picked up on certain traits he has as an auteur director, you know, stuff like his kinetic editing, his sense of humour, the way he blends different genres together. And that's something I quite like about his films, is that he really embraces genre entertainment and the kind of legitimacy of it, instead of looking down on it as quite lowbrow like a lot of cinephiles probably do. You know, he really embraces that, but is playful with it. He plays around, he subverts the expectations of it and does something new, which I really respect him for. But rewatching his films now, you know, with a sort of slightly more refined perspective, I can notice other things about his films and the less sort of obvious stylized elements that connect all of his films. Mainly, the thing I noticed was his characters. They are very similar in a sense. You can tell an Edgar Wright protagonist when you see one. You know, a lot of his protagonists focus on characters who are kind of in a bad situation or are well-intentioned, but they need to improve themselves and better themselves, and by the end of the film, they have improved themselves, but they are true to themselves. I noticed that throughout a lot of his films, but in varying ways. I think that's just really cool to see. So yeah, this ranking's covering the 7 narrative feature films that he's directed. So no documentaries like the Sparks Brothers one, no TV shows that he's directed like Spaced, and no films that he's maybe had a hand in writing or producing but didn't direct. So stuff like the first Ant-Man movie, Attack the Block, or even Sightseers, he has a hand in terms of the process of them, but he didn't direct them, so they're not going to be here. And like with any of these rankings, it is just my opinion, and of course, I'll have a hot take as well. You know, I always have these hot takes in these videos, and we're starting off with one, because at number 7, get ready to drag me across the coals for this one, Baby Driver. Yeah, it's a bit of a tradition of mine to have these kind of hot takes. But unlike some of the other ones I've had, like Pan's Labyrinth or Fantastic Mr. Fox, where even though I don't love those films, I get the appeal of them. With Baby Driver, I don't see what anybody else sees in this film. I just don't care for it. I find it very mediocre, very dull, honestly quite boring. I was often checking my phone on this recent rewatch, and it just feels really style over substance, and in a way that kind of rubs me the wrong way. It's kind of, it's like some other films, like Tenet for Christopher Nolan or French Dispatch for Wes Anderson. You know, they're very good technically and have a, you know, good presentation and whatnot, but the story and characters don't back that up, and the style and substance don't marry very well. So I don't care, and it does rub me the wrong way in a bit. Now, everybody talks about the editing with this film and how it's really well edited and directed and how it's timed with the music because Baby is a getaway driver, he listens to the music on his headphones, and I'm not going to dispute that. It's a really well edited film, and like on a technical level, it's really well put together, and not just a case of the editing, it's edited in sync with the music. It's not just like all the cuts are in sync with the music. It's more even just how the actors are sort of choreographed with how they move and interact with the sets and the props around them. That takes a lot of skill, and I think Edgar Wright really does excel with that, and I can't take that away from the film. It's really, really good in that way. And there's the odd bit I like in there. I like some of the side cast, like John Hamm I thought was really good. He's kind of charismatic, but then kind of turns a bit more sadistic towards the end. Jamie Foxx, I always enjoyed Jamie Foxx in anything, but I enjoyed his character as well. As I said, the music's quite nice, and there's the odd funny gag here and there. I like the Mike Myers gag, always sort of stuck out to me as well. But these are really fleeting moments of good for me, because overall, I just feel a resounding meh towards this film. I don't care for it, and I think it's just the case that, yes, it's a very stylish, very nice looking film, but the story and characters don't back it up. I mean, the story is a very typical crime, heist, thriller, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but this film doesn't really reinvent the wheel like Shaun of the Dead does with horror comedies, or Hot Fuzz does with action comedies. I think if you do compare this to Hot Fuzz, because they are sort of, that's probably the clearest comparison, you know, Hot Fuzz is an action comedy, this is a crime comedy, and those are genres that kind of have often been blended together. You see a lot of crime comedies like the Tarantino films and whatnot, but Hot Fuzz, you know, takes action comedy, which is, you know, we've often seen that before, but blends it together to make it distinct, and it has a distinct sort of personality. Baby Driver just feels like any other Hollywood kind of action crime thriller. It just feels very standard. Even the humour feels very, not unfunny, it's not like an unfunny film, but it feels very like Hollywood humour, like almost like MCU quippy humour, and not really Edgar Wright's sort of signature kind of brand of kind of quite witty humour with the editing. And I don't know, Edgar Wright has a very specific sense of humour that I really get on board with, and Baby Driver just feels a bit light in comparison. But the real kicker for me are the characters. That really kills this film dead. And as I like some of the side characters that I mentioned earlier, but it's just the leads, Baby and Deborah, I really could not care less about them. I mean, putting aside for a minute the actor who plays Baby, even just as a character, both the writing and the performance, it just doesn't do it for me. He's the least interesting protagonist Edgar Wright has made. I think the performance from Ansel Escort, whatever the bloody hell his name is, I think is really quite weak and almost wooden and one note. He just has no charisma and charm to really carry the film. His charisma with Deborah is really just not there. I don't get any sort of romantic chemistry between the two. Deborah's really underwritten, and Lily James is a good actress as well. She's just the love interest, and I don't care about them. I don't care if they get together. I don't care if Baby gets out of this criminal gang. I just don't care because they're so one note and bland, and they're meant to carry the film, are they? What? No, I don't care. Even stuff like Baby's backstory, you know, in both narratively and also the way it's presented in these kind of typical Hollywood childhood flashbacks and whatnot, it just feels very generic. And there's certain other moments, like I don't know why this stuck out to me, but the very first shot of the film where it fades from black and it fades into the wide shot where the car pulls up, there's something about that just feels very standard and not like how Edgar Wright usually opens his films in a very snappy, stylish way, you know, which is ironic considering that Baby Driver is a very stylish film. That's really ironic, but yeah, it's a very, to me, I feel Baby Driver is a very shallow film. It's just not a very engaging film, and I honestly just found it boring. I was checking my phone a lot on this rewatch and I just didn't care for it. But if you enjoy it, that is perfectly fine, and I don't want to take that away from you. I just don't see what everybody else sees in this film. At number 6, I have put his debut film, A Fistful of Fingers, from 1995. It was his no-budget student project. It was like this comedy western spoof film, and I've put this above Baby Driver. That's actually quite funny, but who cares? It's my ranking, I don't care. Obviously, this film is not amazing. It's very cheap, obviously, very rough around the edges, but you can definitely see Edgar Wright's skill and sort of his approach to filmmaking. You can see that from the word go here. It's like with Chris Nolan's first film, Following, you know, I talked about that once. You know, Edgar Wright, you know, you can see his vision from here. I think the clear things you can see are his knack for comedy, which can often come through the dialogue with some really genuinely quite funny little bits of dialogue and humour. There's some really good gags and whatnot.
Wanted, dead or alive. You spin me right round. 12-inch.
Whatever.
And as well as that, the way he plays around with genre conventions, obviously this spoofs, typical spaghetti westerns. Even the ways in like the cinematography, it sort of harks back to these old spaghetti westerns, but puts a comedic take on them. And there's some strong visual comedy as well. There's like the bar where everybody's sort of putting on the act of a sort of typical saloon, kind of bar. I think there's some really strong stuff, especially at the start of the film. I think there's some really kind of novel ideas. I like the fake like horseback, the main cowboy guy, sort of riding on like a fake horse. With the more comedic, spoofy, irreverent tone, he can use the no budget that he has, but he embeds that into the film and makes that part of the joke in a way, as evident by, I said, that the horseback, which is just like a horse's head on like a stick, and it's just the bloke walking about. It's almost like Monty Python-esque, in the Holy Grail. It's a bit like that, but it uses its limited resources to make itself part of the joke, and I think that's quite clever and quite commendable for Edgar Wright. And it is actually kind of enjoyable to watch, and I did enjoy it, although it's not an amazing film. Obviously, it's a very standard film. The way it plays around with the genre isn't as nuanced as films like the Cornetto trilogy would be. It's obviously not as nuanced. It's not going to be. It's his first film, And I do think for a film that's only about an hour and 15 minutes, it does drag on a bit. I think it starts off really well and really strong with some cool, funny gags and ideas and whatnot. But then it does, I think the novelty kind of wears off a little bit. I think that's the trouble with a lot of these first features of a lot of directors, where it's more interesting to watch as a bit of history, of like filmmaking history, rather than its own thing. You're not going to watch this as just its own thing. You'll watch it because, it's how Edgar Wright started off. And that's why you watch it, But it is still worth checking out, because I think you can definitely see his style and his comedic tone and the way he plays around with genre and his like visual filmmaking techniques and whatnot. I think it's a good one to check out, and you can find it on YouTube actually as well. But it's not amazing. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I gotta say I kind of liked it. Now, number 4 and 5, I think, are pretty much on equal footing. I think they're very much on par. And I was really umming and ahhing of the most on this list of which one I should put at number 4 and 5. I was kind of not sure, but I ultimately went for number 5, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Now, before this recent rewatch, this is the film of Edgar Wright's filmography that I hadn't seen in the longest time. I had not seen this film in about 4 or 5 years, something like that. It had been a long time, So I didn't really remember a lot about it. So I was kind of excited to see what I think of it now, and I do still really enjoy it. And to be honest, there's not a lot that I can really fault with this film. Now, this one is very stylish. It's very much Edgar Wright's zany comedic style, cranked up to 11. It just goes for it, And it is really fun. Like, it's so energized. It's like a shot of adrenaline in cinematic form. It's just like, whoa, it's so bonkers. The editing, the action scenes are so bonkers. It feels like a comic book and a video game, brought to life, because it is based on a comic book, I believe. But it's so wild and zany, but so creative at the same time with the imagery, and even the comedy, which can come through the visual style, like the title cards, the humorous title cards. It's really quite funny. I mean, the action is not very realistic, but that's part of the style. It's made part of the style, and I just think it's really, really fun, and just a really great time to watch. But why I think this works is that, yes, all of this bonkers action and this adventure, this fantasy sort of style, yes, it's very over the top, very bonkers, very zany. The kind of core character stuff with Scott Pilgrim, he's a bit of a slacker, part of this like sort of student band, and he fancies Ramona, this girl, but she's got her 7 deadly exes, and they're trying to get together and whatnot. I think that's compelling. I think the chemistry with Scott and Ramona is quite endearing. I think Scott is quite an endearing character. I mean, Michael Cera always plays kind of awkward really well, and I think he does a really good job at it, and it's just endearing to watch. So you do root for him, unlike Baby, which is like he's just so one note. But Michael Cera, he has that kind of charm, that kind of sort of awkward charm that is quite endearing. So you want to see him succeed. You want to see him get with Ramona and defeat her evil 7 exes. In fact, some of the 7 exes are quite funny. I always remembered Chris Evans, sorry, as the sort of douchebag actor guy. He was quite memorable. He was quite funny. And then, having watched all the Wes Anderson films, it's really funny now seeing Jason Schwartzman as the big bad, as Gideon. But he's really good. I thought he was really fun. He's a good laugh. But I think the way that Edgar Wright marries the kind of zany, bonkers fantasy tone with the more grounded character drama, I think works. I think the execution, the sort of zany execution, is a clever and interesting way to reflect the sort of feelings and emotions and ideas of getting over your exes and moving forward and trying to sort of make it as a sort of hero in sort of Scott's case and trying to get together. I think it's reflected well through the execution. I think it's just married really well, which is what Baby Driver was lacking for me. But yeah, it's really bonkers film, and really, it's quite a lot as well. Especially when you're watching it like me at midnight and there's like all these flashing lights. It's like whoa, whoa. But either way, it's a really strong film. I really enjoy it, and I can't really pick much in terms of like faults with it. I don't really have a lot of faults with it. It's just a really fun film. Now at number 4, we have my favourite of the non-Cornetto trilogy films Edgar Wright has done, Last Night in Soho, which, unlike Scott Pilgrim, I think does have some clear flaws, more so than that film. But, you know, conversely, I get more out of Last Night in Soho as opposed to Scott Pilgrim. I don't really connect with it as much, but Last Night in Soho, I really do. I think, first of all, the sort of 60s retro style of, you know, fashion and music and all that sort of stuff. I mean, anybody who knows me knows I love like 60s style music. I love that sort of stuff. So this is naturally going to appeal to me in that sort of way. And also as a student, you know, I connect with Eloise as the main protagonist. You know, she comes from sort of a rural area, moves into the big city, you know, kind of fish out of water kind of stuff. But I liked that. And also I liked how it was presented differently from other films that he's done, you know. But I very much connected with Eloise in that sort of sense of she can't really connect with modern sort of culture and prefers the sort of retro kind of culture. And but it means it's a bit of a struggle for her to kind of connect with others around her. But then by the end, she sort of embraces that side of her, but also embraces modernity and sort of the people around her. So I really connect with her as a character. But it's a gorgeous looking film as well with the 60s production design. I love all of that stuff, and there's some fantastic scenes like the dance sequences. I love all of that. Like the one where it's like Anya Taylor-Joy and Timothy McKenzie, they sort of swap and it's like one take and it's brilliant as well. The characters are also great. As I said, Eloise I really connect with. I think she's a very endearing main protagonist. Sandy, Anya Taylor-Joy, she's brilliant. She gives a great performance. She's very interesting and mysterious and there's a lot interesting about her. Matt Smith is brilliant as the sort of main antagonist, Jack. He's such a slimy, horrible git. He's just so horrible, but he gives a brilliant performance. And never once was I thinking of, oh, that's just Doctor Who there. I know, he really immersed himself in the character, and that's brilliant. I think that was a fantastic performance. And I also really like seeing some of the kind of these older actors like Diana Rigg in what was her final, unfortunately her final film role before she passed away, and also like Terence Stamp. You know, seeing these, you know, distinguished older actors here, I think was really cool to see. And this is Edgar Wright's darkest film, bar none. Even though The World's End dabbled in the darker elements, this film is like is his darkest bar none. The comedy is very much toned down here, and it really is quite disturbing at points, especially when you kind of see some of the horrible stuff from the 60s when Eloise discovers it. You know, it's presented in a really quite a creepy, cool, but effective way. And like discovering the kind of seedy underbelly of a lot of these kind of showbiz, glamorous sort of events, the kind of seedy underbelly of it behind closed doors. It was quite that sort of contrast of the sort of, you know, glitzy, glamorous entertainment with this kind of seedy stuff. It's quite unnerving but effective, I think. I think it's a good message of kind of like not looking into the past. Don't romanticize about you were born in the wrong decade, because you probably weren't. The past can be quite a nasty place. You just don't really see that these days. So it's best to move forward. And I think that's just a really strong idea that I really resonated with. And that's why I say I get more out of Last Night in Soho. Now I think rewatching it, I didn't love it as much. I wasn't as head over heels over it as I used to be. I think because I was sort of like, this is so different after Baby Driver, which was very formulaic. You know, this was so different. I don't think it's as revolutionary or as different as I made out to be back then. I wouldn't go that far now. And for me, I still find the ending just doesn't quite. I don't think the film sticks the landing really at the end. I mean, not necessarily the twist. I like the twists of certain older characters in the modern day and who they were in the 60s. And looking back on this rewatch at the clues that are in the film, I think it's quite cool to find them. But the actual ending, I don't know. I just don't know if it just feels a bit it feels like a very sudden sort of a gear shift. It feels very sudden, and I don't know. I don't know. It just feels very sudden and not in a good way. It just doesn't feel like it had much time to really breathe it. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But yeah, as I say, whilst this film does have a few more clear flaws than Scott Pilgrim does, I get more personally from Last Night in Soho, and it is excellently done. And you know, brilliant, a gorgeous looking film, great horror elements, you know, characters that I can connect with, ideas that I can connect with. And whilst it is definitely something different for Edgar Wright, and not as stylized in terms of his editing and whatnot, it still very much feels like his handiwork because of certain editing tricks, certain camera tricks, that sort of passion for retro style, and also just the characters as well, as mentioned. It still feels like an Edgar Wright film. So I think, yeah, I personally really love it, and probably would say it's his most underrated film. At number 3 now, we've got the entire Cornetto trilogy, and at the third place is The World's End, which has always kind of been the weakest to me of the trilogy, but I still love it. I hate keep calling it the weakest, because it is how I feel like it is the one that I enjoy the least, but I still love it, and because it has always had that reputation, I don't want people to think I think less of it, because I still love it. It's just I prefer the other two more. They are two of my favourite films, Shaun and Hot Fuzz are. But as for The World's End, yeah, it's a really fun film, you know, mostly. You know, it's obviously this pub crawl, you know, these five lads, you know, five mates getting back together to their old town and doing this pub crawl that they never finished when they were kids, you know, and it is really fun for the most part, you know, seeing the clashing personalities between the group. You know, obviously there's Gary King, who's probably the most interesting character of this trilogy. But you've got him as this kind of fun-loving kind of character. There's an interesting point about him, I'll make it later, but he's really endearing. And then there's Andy, played by Nick Frost, who, you know, he's the more serious one this time around. And I think acting-wise, it's probably Pegg and Frost's best performances across the entire trilogy. There's a kind of unspoken tension between these two, and it's quite interesting. And as I say, these clashing personalities between everyone else in the group, it's really, really interesting to see unfold. And there's some of the others are quite nice. I really like Peter. He's quite a sympathetic character. He's quite, I liked him. And when he meets his childhood bully again and he doesn't recognise him, that was quite a lovely little moment. I really cared about him. You know, I think it's enjoyable to watch their dynamic unfold throughout the majority of the film, and it's just I enjoy watching it. And it's less overtly funny, but it's still entertaining through their interactions and the dialogue. It is quite fun. There's plenty of great hidden details, like the names of the pubs reflecting elements of the story and such. That's really clever. I can't go into all the foreshadowing here, but you know, these Cornetto films have great foreshadowing like that. Then the whole twist is that this entire town has been replaced by aliens, or blanks as they're called. And I think the action is really cool and really creative and quite novel. Because of the sci-fi element, I think it allows for more creativity in the action, and I think it's just something unique and different for the trilogy. But it also plays a nice role thematically of kind of like the past and looking back, and ultimately it's not what you remember, you know, it is different, things do change, and, you know, even though, yes, it is this kind of sci-fi abstraction in a way, it still relates to reality, and especially through Gary King, who ultimately, for him, it never really got better than that original night back in the 90s, you know, it never got better, his best days are behind him, and I think that's why maybe I don't appreciate it as much, because it does take a bit more maturity and perspective and experience to fully appreciate this film, but even now I still do recognise what this film's going for. I still appreciate that idea. The thing is, I always found that Gary King, in comparison to, say, Shaun and Nick Angel and Hot Fuzz, I always found Gary to feel more like a character. He felt very heightened, you know, he's very exaggerated, even just the way he looks, you know, with the trench coat and the dockers and you know, he felt very exaggerated and more like a character. And even the presentation of the film felt more polished, the light felt softer, and it didn't have that kind of same roughness that the Shaun and Hot Fuzz did. But I think that works because, yeah, Gary is trying to compensate with his kind of larger-than-life persona because he's got nothing else, and that's quite... When I realise that now, I think that's kind of more tragic, and it's, you know, I appreciate this film more and more each time, and I think that's really quite powerful and effective. But I do love The World's End, I really, really do, and I do hate putting it below the other two because it kind of, for me, it still plays into the idea that it is the weak one of the trilogy. When it's not, it's still bloody brilliant. I still love the film. It's just not my favourite. I just enjoy the other two more. I'm actually tempted to do the next segment in a Sanford accent because at number 2 we've got Hot Fuzz. I'm not doing the entire segment. I'm not doing 5 minutes of that. But my God, I was just quoting then before recording this, the Hot Fuzz quotes, and like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz are just so ingrained into British culture in the past 15, 20 years. Like, it's so just... Everybody knows the lines. I'm always quoting the great big bushy beard line, or if anybody ever says the greater good, I instinctively have to repeat it, even under my breath. It's that ingrained into our culture that I love these two films, and I adore Hot Fuzz and what it goes for. As I said, there's so many quotable lines in the film, and there's so many great gags, and it's just really fun. And obviously the interactions between the characters are all really fun. So it obviously follows Nick Angel, who's a London police officer, and then he moves to the countryside because he's too good at his job. You know, he's well-intentioned, he's very skilled, but he's kind of socially quite distant, can't really switch off, can't really connect with others. A bit like Eloise in Last Night in Soho, I felt like, you know, well-intentioned, but a bit socially distant, and ultimately learns to embrace the culture of Sanford, but still stays true to himself. You know, and that's evident in the fact that he doesn't actually kill anybody at the end. You know, he very much doesn't kill. You know, he sticks to his principles, and I think that's a great thing about Edgar Wright's films. You know, they have characters who grow and change, but stay true to themselves. Yeah, I think that's just great, and you can see that in Nick Angel. Once again, obviously, like great foreshadowing certain characters and certain, you know, it's all brilliantly done, and it's always great to pick up on these things on these rewatches. I absolutely love Danny, you know, Nick Frost's character. He's got my name, so you know that's great. But I love his character. It's just, you know, he's so lovable and endearing. He's just like, oh man, you just love him, man. And when he sort of stands up to his dad later on in the film, who's part of the neighbourhood watch, you know, it's like it's great, you know. There's so many great characters in this film, and so many, you know, obviously there's the police lot, you know, they're really fun and they have some brilliant, cracking lines. Also, some of the villains, you know, part of the Neighborhood Watch. I mean, Timothy Dalton, obviously James Bond, but it's so cool seeing him here. I love his character. But even the story, you know, as a comedy action film, I think it's really great. It's a great, like, sort of slow burn murder mystery. The gore is pretty nasty, like, especially the one where the guy as the church spy go like impale him. It's horrible. There's some really like icky stuff, but it's really effectively done. I love the shootouts in the final, you know, in the finale, you know, whether it's in the streets or in the supermarket. I love that. I love the little fight in the sort of mini little Sanford model with Nick and Simon, and I actually quite like it how it's sort of they're sort of destroying that sort of model. It's like they're destroying the idyllic image of the town, just like how Nick is trying to kind of challenge that idea, which has been unhealthily upheld by the Neighborhood Watch, you know? I mean, the fact that they show off the paperwork in the police force, that's... What other film ever shows that? I'm pretty sure the actual Met Police actually commended the film for actually highlighting that, you know, quite overtly. I think that's just something... That's a way that, obviously, it takes a comedy action genre and flips it on its head and makes it unique and stand out. And it's just... This film is absolutely brilliant. I love it. I love it. I love it to bits. And at number 1, to... shock horror, it's Shaun of the Dead. Who would have bloody guessed that? I thought it was going to be Fistful of Fingers at the top. What was that voice I did then? Anyway, I've banged on about Shaun of the Dead enough on the channel. You know, I've watched it so many times. It probably is the most rewatchable film for me out there. I love it to bits. But if you want my kind of best opinions on the film, go and check out my 5 Perfect Movies video. I'll leave it in the description, the link to it. But rewatching Shaun for this video, I thought that this is the first time I'm rewatching it post-studying it at school, you know, which was one of the films I studied. And if you've seen my film series ranking, you'll know that because of how limiting the school structure can be, I didn't enjoy studying Shaun of the Dead that much. It was quite limiting. And I thought I was kind of burnt out on Shaun of the Dead. But rewatching it here, I didn't go into it trying to look for new hidden meanings. I just wanted to go into it, just have a good time, and I still found new meanings. I think that was you know, I'm not going in looking for stuff, and I find stuff. Obviously, there's like small details I noticed, like in terms of like certain jokes and payoffs and like little lines of dialogue that are, you know, clever double meanings and whatnot. But also like some other broader points that I noticed in the film this time. I'm thinking stuff like the sort of primal nature of certain characters who become zombies. I mean, particularly with Ed. And the thing I noticed is that the rise of technology, you can kind of feel that through elements of the film, whether it's the way that it's shot in, like, you know, obviously this is the digital age now, and the way that the film is made with the whip pans and such, it's a very... Edgar Wright is very much a digital age director, you know. But not just that, but with technology in the film, like video games, TV, cameras, you know, there's the bit where Ed's more focused on taking a picture of Shaun with what's her name, Mary, the lady zombie at the beginning. I say, you know, I'm always finding new things about this film, and I think having seen it that many times, I have a really kind of, I have this kind of almost complete picture when I watch it of understanding how the film flows, you know, the different, sort of the repetition, you know, from the first half where it's all normal and the second half in the apocalypse kind of repetition. But I don't think I will ever tire of this film because I do just love it. I love its sense of humour. I love how it plays around with the genre conventions of horror movies and does it in a kind of playful, comedic way. But it also does treat it seriously as well when, you know, the gore is really nasty and towards the end of the film, the jokes slow down and, you know, it's less piss-takey, really. It's just a more comedic take on a zombie apocalypse because it's more that the characters are sort of nobodies, they're kind of screw-ups, you know, Shaun and Ed are kind of screw-ups, you know, and they're just sort of put in this situation. That's where the comedy comes from, not for the fact that, oh, pop culture reference. It's not as sort of lowbrow as that. It's just really well done, but it's just so funny, it's so quotable, it's just, oh man, I love it to bits, I love it to bits, and you will not change my mind on that, so... There you have it. So that's my updated Edgar Wright ranking. Hope you enjoyed it. How would you rank these films? Were you surprised? Probably not. You probably weren't surprised at this. I mean, it's not changed that much. The ranking has. The ranking hasn't changed that much. It's more just, I think, how I sort of view the films has sort of changed in a way. But yeah, thank you for watching. Be sure to leave your rankings and opinions in the comments below. I always love to hear what other people have to say about these films. And until the next video, you take care and have a great day. Bye bye.